Alrighty. Looks like slowed down a little bit, so I suppose we'll get started. Uh, Hi, everybody. My name is Connor Nichols, and I'm an AmeriCorps member through the Conservation Nebraska's Common Ground program. I wanted to say thank you for coming to this program, and I hope you're all excited to learn a bit more about food waste in America. Just a few reminders for everyone. Those of you who are online will have their cameras off and microphones muted, so you can't be seen or heard. Any questions you may have can be put into the Q&A section towards the bottom of your screen, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. Additionally, this webinar is being recorded, so if you miss anything or if you just kind of want to watch it again, you'll be able to find it in a few weeks posted on the Conservation Nebraska's YouTube channel. Lastly, towards the end of the presentation and usually before we get into the Q&A, we'll have a short poll, and if you wouldn't mind filling that out before you leave, we really appreciate it, as it kind of helps us to improve future events and gives us a bit of feedback towards what interests you and things like that. With that being said, if you wouldn't mind, I'll introduce our speaker, Shay Flowerday. Shay is an environmental health educator for the City of Lincoln Solid Waste Management. She has a degree in environmental studies from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln with a concentration in public health. Shay is also pursuing her master's degree in public health at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. She's passionate about reducing waste and promoting sustainability in our community to better the planet. Now that intros are done, I'll let her take it ahead.
And we did just get a question in the Q&A saying that, excuse me, someone couldn't hear. Is that the case for others as well?
Seems like other people are able to hear. Yes. Okay. So not sure what the issue is, but hopefully you'll be able to figure that out. Take it away.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get started. Thank you all for tuning in today. Oh wait, I have to share my screen, don't I? So, as Connor said, my name is Shay Flowerday, and I'm going to be giving a pretty broad overview of food waste in America and the scope of the issue and why it's an issue and what we can do about it. And then next week, I think you should tune in to Janet Buck's presentation, and she's going to dive in more in depth into how our actions impact food waste here in America. So before I go into food waste, I wanted to tackle solid waste management as a whole. And in 2018, approximately 292.4 million tons of trash were produced in the United States. And of that, 146.1 million tons ended up in the landfill. So about 50% of all waste that humans create is going to end up in a landfill. And on the chart on the right, we see the rates of where all this waste is going, how much of it's getting recycled, and that's about 24%. About 8%, that yellow stripe, is composting. And then you see the gray chunk is the most significant portion, and that's all going to the landfill. Now, the magnitude of food wasted is estimated to be between 161 to 335 billion pounds of food per year wasted, and that's exclusively in the United States. And that comes out to be approximately a third of all of the food produced here in the United States that never gets eaten for one reason or another. And approximately 1 in 10 Americans is food insecure. That equals about 35 million people estimated. And with the food that we're currently wasting, we have enough calories and could create enough meals to feed 150 million people. So it just kind of puts the problem in perspective that it's not that we don't have enough food, we have far too much food and plenty of it is getting wasted. And in the pie chart on the bottom right is from our Lincoln landfill study. And it found that 40% of what goes into our landfill is organics, which is about 30% food waste, and then about 10% wood waste and other organic matter. Now, in the state of Nebraska, we do have a law that bans yard waste from April through all of November. So it is not allowed to go into the landfill here in Lincoln, Lancaster County. So a good majority of the organics that are going to be in this 40% are from food waste because we don't have too much from yard waste. And this diagram from the EPA just kind of puts things in perspective in regards to the emissions and water and energy and land use that all is essentially wasted by the problem of food waste. Because if we waste a chicken breast at home, we're also wasting all of the resources that it took to get that chicken all the way to my home. And these two charts show where along the supply chain food is more commonly wasted and demonstrates the inputs that all go into this. So farming and the primary production portion of growing food equates to about 17% of the food wasted. But as you can see, it contributes most of the land, fertilizer, pesticides, and a good chunk of the water all happens in that farming stage. And then it goes to distribution, processing, manufacturing centers. And here about 15% of food waste comes from that stage. And then it goes to the retailer, where about 20% of food waste comes from. These are your stores, hospitals, that sort of thing. And then we come to the last stage of the supply chain, which is the consumption, or what happens within our homes. And 48%, which is about half of food waste, is wasted in the consumption stage. So that is once it gets home, half of the food waste in the entire country is getting thrown away at home, which I think is, it's obviously not great, but I think it's kind of inspiring because a lot of environmental issues are so large and you kind of have to start at the top down to tackle it. But food waste really feels like an issue that each of our decisions every day can have an impact on. And if half of that, of all food waste, is happening in the home, we have the power to change that. This goes into the causes of food waste at each stage of the supply. So in the farm, basically the reasons why food would be wasted in each sector. So when you're farming, it could be due to crop damage or outdated machinery or inefficient harvesting. And a lot of times it's just not economically feasible to get all of the produce out of the field because that costs labor and time, and some of it might be damaged. So sometimes it's just not worth it to salvage that. So they just leave it in the farm. And then issues within transportation of food, either from the farm to the processing, from processing to the stores, from the store to home. You can have issues like lacking cold storage, or there's a big issue of shipments just not getting timed right. And then, say, a restaurant might not know that a shipment arrived and is sitting outside. And then by the time they find out that that shipment was dropped off, it's been spoiled. Then during food processing, this can be wasted due to poor planning and a lot of equipment-based losses. Once you get to stores and restaurants, you're looking at causes such as employees not having proper food safety and food handling knowledge, or poor planning, so just not getting the product out at a reasonable rate. And then at home, which, as I said, is where about half of food waste comes from, this is based on a lot of our daily decisions of, is this spoiled or is it not? A lot of people don't understand what date labeling means, like your best by, sell by. A lot of people take those dates as like strict, and so even if it's still perfectly good because you've stored it properly, and that date is kind of an overestimation of how little time you have with each food. This graph shows where the end result for food waste by category. So the dark blue line is going to be your food manufacturing. So as you can see, the bulk of food waste in food manufacturing, which was about 15% of all food wasted, that goes to anaerobic digestion and animal feed primarily, and a little bit of land application and donation. And these are more preferred methods than landfilling because you're able to get a second use out of them. And I'll go more into what anaerobic digestion is a little bit later in the presentation. And if you're using the food waste to feed animals, that's obviously a great thing because they're getting nutrition from it, and that food is not going to the landfill where it would produce methane. And then these lighter bars represent retail, food service, and then the household. And as you can see, controlled combustion and primarily landfill are the biggest destination for food waste within the household and food service. So those light gray bars on the landfill section are really what we're aiming to reduce, because landfill and controlled combustion or incineration are going to be what we want as our last resorts for dealing with food waste, according to this scale. So the EPA just last week, I think, came out with this updated wasted food scale. Previously, they had a hierarchy, but they updated it from the 90s to reflect better what the technology and science is saying now. So it goes on the left from most preferred method of what you do with food waste to least preferred. So the best choice for preventing food waste is, or the best choice for reducing food waste is to just prevent it entirely. Reduce the amount that you're buying, or the amount that if there's something that you might not eat, like your bag of greens that you throw away every 2 weeks, maybe reevaluate what is coming into your home and what is leaving in the trash can versus what you're consistently eating. And then their second best option is donation or upcycling of food. And upcycling of food would be like taking all of the veggie scraps from a restaurant or something and dehydrating those scraps and turning them into crackers or a smoothie or something of that nature, where you're taking the less desired products and changing them into something that can be sold and eaten and enjoyed. And for donation on that end, there's also the Good Samaritan law that was introduced in 1996, which provides any person or organization some liability protection from when you're donating, so that if in case someone were to get sick or something, as long as you made a donation of food within good faith, then you are legally protected and don't have to worry about the repercussions of that. And that was essentially to encourage people to donate their food and not be scared of, potential repercussions of that. And in addition, if you work in a restaurant or some facility that produces a good amount of food waste, you could definitely talk to your supervisors about a donation option and explain to them the Good Samaritan law. And there are also potential tax benefits as well if you make donations to certain organizations. Then a little less preferred than donating or upcycling, we have feeding animals or leaving unharvested. So as I said, feeding animals is going to give them nutrition and reduce the amount we're sending to landfills, reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions from that food going to the landfill. And here in Nebraska, some states do require either a license to feed animals, and specifically swine, wasted food or food remnants, but Nebraska does not require a license or require the food to be heat treated before you give it to animals. So that is definitely a possible route to take here in Nebraska, since we don't have any strict regulations there. Then, and leaving unharvested food in the fields is kind of ties back into what I was talking about earlier, in that at farms, sometimes it's just not economically feasible to get that food out of the field. And even if it were to get out of the field, there's still a chance that if it gets donated or sold down the line, it still might not get eaten. And then you've put more resources into harvesting all those remnant foods. And then in the end, it still gets wasted anyways. Then a little less preferred than that is composting or anaerobic digestion, with the beneficial use of digestate and biosolids. And I'll dive more into compost and anaerobic digestion in a minute. And then less preferred than that, we have anaerobic digestion with disposal of digestate or biosolids, which means that the products that you get from anaerobic digestion essentially go to the landfill, and then that is also wasted. Or applying food waste to the land. And then we want to avoid, as much as possible, sending food down the drain, landfilling, or incinerating food with or without energy recovering. So they're saying, even if you're recovering energy from this food through incineration or a landfill gas collection system, it's still, the cons outweigh the benefits of this method of food waste disposal. So why should we care about food waste? Well, wasted food in America accounts for 2% of the GDP. And it also contributes to social equity issues and is a large environmental concern because, as I've discussed, landfilling food waste is a waste of all the resources that go into making food, such as land, water, pesticides, fertilizers, and just energy in general. And then another big factor of why we care about food waste in the landfill is because of methane emissions. And this EPA little infographic says that wasting food in the US causes greenhouse gas emissions that are equivalent to more than 50 million gas-powered passenger vehicles driving on the road. So this has a significant greenhouse gas impact. So to dive a little bit more into food waste and equity or social justice issues, this great graph from ReFed, they have a lot of good food waste resources, and they created this graph that demonstrates the 5 main equity issues that they found within America's food system. And up at the top, you see food waste by DEIG landscape assessment. And the DEIG stands for diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. So just talking about making sure that everyone is fairly represented and treated fairly. So when we're talking about the food system, of course, a lot of lower income people don't have access to the food, while we have plenty of food that's being wasted. So this creates a large social issue of food insecurity. And in addition, a lot of food that gets donated to food banks and that sort of thing is then received by lower income families, which can often be immigrant families that may not have the same understanding and familiarity with the foods that people are donating. So then that causes more food waste because they don't know how to cook these items, don't have any interest in them, and they're just not culturally relevant to them and their what they're used to eating. And then there are also lots of low-income workers working in the food system, and so we want to do as much as we can to help them out. And so in that regards, buying with your dollar is a very important part of the equity aspect of reducing food waste. And if you can afford it when you're out shopping, you might want to look into fair trade organizations and foods and other certifications that signify that everyone along the food supply chain is paid a living wage, treated fairly, treated equally, etc. Now to dive into methane and food waste. So methane emissions are one of the biggest environmental factors of food waste and why we want to keep it out of the landfills. And that is because methane is a greenhouse gas that's about 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide because of its higher ability to absorb heat. And you sometimes see stats that are like 80 to 100 times more potent than carbon dioxide. That just depends on the time frame, like how long of a time span that potency is for. So, because methane gases off or has a lower life half-life than carbon dioxide, it's more potent, but also goes away quicker. So this is the 28 times more potent is the 100-year outlook. So if you're looking 20 years from now, methane will have like an 84 times more potent impact than carbon dioxide, but as it off gases, it's a little less, but still significantly more harmful than carbon dioxide. And when food gets introduced into a landfill, it breaks down anaerobically, meaning that it does not have access to oxygen because of all the trash and dirt that's piled on top of it. And this is what produces methane when food is breaking down without oxygen. And then these facts just kind of demonstrate the carbon dioxide equivalents that are produced in a large compost pile versus the same amount of food waste in a landfill. So you can see it's almost almost double the impact of landfilling food waste compared to composting it. But as we saw earlier, landfilling food is a very common practice. And in fact, landfills are the third largest producer of methane emissions. The first being oil and gas, and then in livestock fermentation within their guts. And even though emissions from landfills have decreased since 1990 due to landfill gas collection systems, more food is being landfilled than ever before. And you can see that with the little purple bar graph over here, that purple is getting much wider, even though total emissions are going down. And in 2020, an estimated 65 million tons of food were landfilled, specifically landfilled, so that does not include all food wasted. And when we landfill food, it promotes a linear economy where you just take resources, you use them, and then you dispose of them. And that is not what we're looking to do. We want to create a circular economy where the nutrients can be returned back to the earth. So a little bit about landfill gas collection systems, because they're very important for keeping methane out of our atmosphere. We actually do have one at Bluff Road Solid Waste Management System, or the Lincoln Lancaster landfill. We have a landfill gas collection system, and this entails pipes laid all across the landfill with little holes that can suck in all the gas that comes out of the landfill, and it creates a vacuum, and it pumps all the gases into this blower flare treatment area where it is cleaned up and all of the volatile organic compounds are removed, and it becomes just CO2 or methane. And then it is able to become either electricity. And here in Lincoln, once it's cleaned, we do send it to LES, and then if it's economically feasible for them, they will use it in their grid. Now, a little bit about anaerobic digestion. So, anaerobic digestion is a process where organic materials such as food waste are being microbially digested in an anaerobic environment, which is lacking oxygen. And this converts the food waste into biogas and a nutrient-rich digestate. Now, this might seem confusing because I mentioned that when food is decomposing in a landfill, that's an anaerobic environment and it lacks oxygen, and that's bad because it's what generates methane. But in this system, an anaerobic digester is an enclosed system that has the ability to capture all or most of the gas that's going to be coming off. And then that biogas is able to become fuel in various forms. So then in addition, at the end of aerobic digestion, you are left with this digestate or biosolids. It's considered biosolids if it goes through a wastewater treatment plant, but if it's a feedstock like food waste, it's going to be called digestate. And this is essentially like a super potent sludge that can either be dried or compost or mixed with compost or just applied to the land as is, and that can improve the soil health as well as reducing the quantity sent to the landfill. And the EPA also found that the gross electricity production per metric ton of wasted food processed in an anaerobic digester is between 100 and 420 kilowatt hours. So that's so 1 metric ton of wasted food can be enough to power the average US home from about 3.5 to 15 days. Now, what is compost? So compost is a bunch of organic materials that have been put together and put in the right conditions where microorganisms are feeding on them. And then in the end, instead of biogas and some sludge digestate, you're left with a larger pile of compost, which is rich in organic matter, which is really great for the soil and nutrients as well. So the benefits of composting and also anaerobic digestion, if you're using that digestate, is that it reduces greenhouse gas emissions. It can save farmers money if you're using less fertilizer and less water, because compost and digestate have higher water retention capabilities. It improves the soil's health by adding organic matter, nutrients, and water retention. And then it also reduces the volume sent to the landfill. A little bit about creating your own compost pile, if any of you are interested, because it's a pretty relatively simple way to minimize your food waste impact. But creating a compost pile is basically like creating a recipe. So it needs the bacteria, which that will already be in whatever feedstock you use. You need to keep your pile damp, but you don't want it to be soggy. A pile needs oxygen so that those microorganisms can breathe and do their thing. So it's recommended that you turn your pile pretty regularly. And then one of the most important things about a successful compost pile is the carbon to nitrogen ratio. And you need a proper balance of carbon and nitrogen because if you have too many greens, which are things like grass clippings, food scraps, coffee grounds, the pile will get slimy and start smelling like ammonia, lots of bad situations. So you really need to add browns, which are things like sawdust, twigs, leaves, dry leaves, or if you don't have a big yard, don't have much of that, you can just tear up paper or cardboard or brown sacks to add browns to the mix. But ideally, you want a 3-to-1 browns to greens ratio. So you want 3 times as much carbon as you do food waste, if that's how you're using your pile. And as seen in this picture, if you're building your own pile, you're going to want to layer those browns and greens. And the kitchen scraps can go near the top, but then if you're putting your kitchen scraps in a backyard compost, it's recommended that you cover it again with leaves or some other carbon to prevent smells and pests and a lot of those issues that potentially come with composting. There are also a few things to keep in mind that you do not want to add into your compost pile if you're doing one at home. Those include dairy, meat and bones, oil, grease, and fat, which also includes particularly like oily, greasy, fatty leftovers. Probably don't want to add. And then you never want to add treated or painted wood to a pile because that can contaminate the compost with whatever chemicals were used in that wood, and then you might not have the best growing plants. The reason for a lot of these items not going in the compost is also to reduce pests and like biological bacteria that you don't want growing in a pile. And if creating your own pile seems like too much work, if you're local to Lincoln, we do have a service through Uribe, and they have a composting option. So you can just get like a weekly curbside service to put all your food waste in. And they take it to Prairie Land Dairy Farm currently to be composted. Now, gonna bring it back to this wasted food scale one more time, because ultimately what we want to do is prevent food waste. So how can we do this? My biggest recommendation is to conduct a little waste audit within your household and find the biggest sources of food waste. What are the things that you most commonly are throwing out, and start thinking about how you might be able to reduce that, or like maybe could you freeze that item before it goes bad, things like that. And then the most important thing is to tune in next week to hear Janet's presentation, because she's going to dive more into how we can prevent food waste ourselves. And now, do your poll.
Yeah, thank you very much for that presentation, Shay. Yeah, and like she said, we're sending out that questionnaire poll right now, and it's just 3 or 4 questions. The last one is a bit longer, but you can be as detailed or as concise as you want to be. So we'll just have a little bit of time for that, and then get into some of the questions. So I suppose we'll start with the first one, but question from Justin. Do you suppose that most of Nebraska's landfills compositions are similar to Lincoln's?
Really, I only have experience with Lincoln's landfills and our waste characterization study, so I'm not certain on that. But I can tell you that the average US landfill has a slightly lower food waste and organics percentage. It's about 22 to 24% of an average US landfill is going to be food waste, whereas ours is 30 to 40. So I'm sorry, I don't know too much about other Nebraska landfills.
That's interesting that it's a bit higher than the average United States landfill. I wonder if that's maybe related to like agricultural practices here, but
Yeah.
I'm not sure. We have another question from Colton. Is there a reduction in food waste when prices are higher on items from like inflation or shortages?
I don't have the specific answer on that, but I have read that it's been shown that lower income families waste food at about the same rates as higher income families, which I found really interesting and probably wasn't expecting, because you would think that if you're struggling more in that regards, you would be more conscious about what you're doing with your food and how much you're wasting. So I would be inclined to say that it doesn't have that much of an effect these days. but also you think back to like our grandparents, generations past, and I mean, going all the way back to indigenous people, they used like every part of the animals that they killed. And then throughout World War I and World War II and the Great Depression, like it was kind of it was just the societal norm to save food and not waste food, and now we've just kind of strayed from that. So
Mhm.
it's very interesting.
Yeah. Have another question from Sarah, who's working the Zoom call. What would you say is the highest wasted food item that you see in most households? Is there generally a pattern you see at all?
Yeah, I believe it's produce. The biggest ones are like produce, meat and dairy. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, just shorter shelf lives on that, I imagine.
Yep.
Plus, like, it's always the quote unquote ugly foods that
Right.
people like to throw out a lot more. It's not as aesthetically pleasing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would think that the ugly factor, like the imperfections, would be a big reason why
Mhm.
produce is the biggest.
Yeah. Um, if anybody else has any more questions, we'd be happy to try and answer them. Otherwise, we'll probably be wrapping it up.
Right. Thank you everyone for tuning in again, and I hope you learned a little bit about food waste.
Yeah, thank you very much. And we appreciate you giving your presentation, Shay. It was very interesting.
Thank you.
So we'll just give it a few more minutes. People can trickle out if they'd like, but we'll just wait here in case there are any other questions.